My name is Leanne Hackman-Carty, for those of you who don't know me, with Economic Developers of Alberta. And every week we're hosting these free webinars based on a topic which we hope will help each of you with your business and economic recovery efforts now during the COVID crisis. So today's topic, we're going to be talking about supply chain, because there's been a lot of interest in the news lately on what's happening with the supply chain, with the food supply in particular, but how that impacts your business communities, your local community, in accessing products that they need on an ongoing basis and going forward. So that's the topic today. Just before we get started, I'll have everyone keep themselves on mute during the presentations, and you can, if you have questions, put them in the chat box, and Nancy Toombs with EDA, she's going to be moderating once again and helping bring those questions forward at the end of the webinar. We will have this taped, and any presentations that take place will be able to download, as well as contact information for our presenters, their websites. The other thing is, you would have seen on LinkedIn, and it's on the front page of our website, we've partnered with the Alberta Chamber of Commerce and Community Futures Network of Alberta to do another business survey with our Alberta businesses. So if you want to look at that survey, want to circulate that to your businesses, it's going to be another way to get ongoing data from our communities as to what the most important issues are. So that's available as well, that link. So to get started, we have three special guests today on our webinar. We've got Tom McCaffrey. Tom is with the Alberta Institute for the Supply Chain Canada. We'll start with Tom's presentation, and then Cynthia Clark. She is a founder of the Women in Supply Chain Association. And I know, Cynthia, you've got a long-standing history with transportation in particular, logistics. And then Dallas Sherwood, thanks to one of our board members, Martin Ebel, Dallas agreed yesterday to participate. And he's going to speak to some of the stuff he's seeing on the front lines. He's located kind of in the Raymond, Lethbridge, that southern Alberta area. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Tom if you could unmute yourself and then talk to the group about your perspective on supply chain.
Sure. Hi, everybody. So I'm Tom McCaffrey, the CEO of the Alberta Institute of Supply Chain Canada, as Leanne said. We have 1,900 supply chain members here in Alberta. So we serve quite a significant membership group, and they are multi-sectoral, so everything from agriculture to energy and everything in between. So we have quite a broad base. We have a national task force that's been focused on COVID, bringing together national players from all of these sectors as well, and having lots of conversations, governments in the room. And so we've been doing our best to try to highlight our members, bring their information, and get them talking with government to really focus. The main topic I'm, I guess, focused on right now is looking at what's happened in past pandemics. We've had obviously nothing to this scale or size, but with SARS and H1N1, the economy's gone into a V curve. It was a supply side issue to begin with, and then becomes a demand side issue as things shift and things go back to normal. So whether you want to call it the V curve or the bullwhip, there's this giant downside, and then we do come back. And so the question that we have is, is this good news? Is there an upside at some point in time, whether it's a month or 6 months down the road? And I think the reality for Alberta, for everywhere, is that there is an upside, but do we have the industrial firepower to actually be able to come back and take advantage of that? And I think that's where my biggest concern for Alberta is right now, is that we're not really ready, and I don't know that we were ever really ready. We've had obviously a trying time for the last little while. We don't have access to the same labor and capital that other markets do, the US specifically, but Europe. We were already in a distressed state. We've got an aging labor force in many sectors, manufacturing specifically. Uh, we've already seen a lot of our traditional energy supply chains sort of go to a more globalized setting, and the reality is we could be in a place. It's the easiest time in history to build a global supply chain. Now, obviously, that's had an impact for some, but for Alberta companies to really take advantage of the upside of the V curve, they're going to need to be prepared and have labor ready to go. My concern is when the Alberta economy is heated up in the past, we've seen, really heavy labor increase costs. We've basically really had some issues when the economy does get hot. And I'm not saying that we're going to come out of this in a super hot economy. I hope for all of our sakes we do, but I just don't know that Alberta companies will necessarily be ready unless we help them to actually prepare for that. So I think that the reality is for companies right now, they're going to do what they can to try to keep their doors open. There's going to be some issues. Some companies are quite busy, obviously, and others are sidelined almost 100%, if not 100%. The administrative burden of rehiring and restaffing and retooling once we come up on the upside of the V curve is going to be a real challenge for us. I think if you look at it, the reality is that unless we help companies to keep their labor ready and help them administratively and I think the government is attempting to do that to a degree, we're not really going to be very well positioned. So right now, the supply chain is dealing with the issues that are in front of them, as is the government. But it's sort of that 6 month beyond time horizon, which is what I think we really need to start to focus on. If you look at the food supply chain, they were already grappling with certain issues before this. And now we've got growers saying that they might not be able to get their crops planted. So that's the start of the food supply chain, obviously. So that's a big deal. There could be some 6 month to 1 year issues just in having the right amount of crops if we're coming out the other end. So unsure what the long term capacity of that's going to be. We've had panic buying situations. It's hard to forecast or really understand what that's going to mean and if that's going to continue. And in the food supply chain, again, we've had some companies report sales are up 400%, at the retail level, but then we have wholesalers that are reporting that their sales are down almost 70%. And so it's really hard to grapple with what's actually happening at the ground level, because it seems like everyone in the food sector should be doing quite well, and that's actually not the case. So the preparedness to come out to deal with the upside, I think, is something that I don't have a lot of answers to right now, other than the fact that we do need to deal with some of these issues. And then these supply chains were already dealing with issues themselves. So you got free range versus factory farm, the buy local, global trade restrictions on canola that we've had issues with China. All of those things are still there in the background, and some of them might go away, some of them might be tempered, some of them might be twice as bad when we come back out the other side. And so I think we're in for a bit of a bumpy ride, and our role as Supply Chain Canada is to try to prepare our membership as best we can. But I don't think there's ever been a more important time to have supply chain professionals that are as active and ready to go. And maybe we should be looking at building our pool of members as much as we can, and using our infrastructure to train and keep employees as ready to go as we possibly can. So I'll kind of stop there, I guess. That's kind of a very quick and dirty review. And if there's any questions or thoughts on what I've said, I'm happy to answer questions.
Thanks, Tom. I know we're going to have time at the end for questions too, but just before we move on to Cindy, just curious, on your website, is that where you're providing resources? I'm just thinking for people on the call, are there things that they can use and take advantage of that will help them prepare their businesses and their communities in the future?
Yeah, so actually the Supply Chain Canada website has a COVID response page on there, and there's a ton of information from company supports to what we're doing to some of the output from from the task force that we have ongoing right now. So if you go to our website, there's a pretty extensive, it's actually really well laid out, easy to click on all the different links. You can watch the webinars that we've had from different consultants and professionals on it. So it's a pretty extensive, pretty long list of resources there for everybody.
That's great. That's great. Well, I'm sure we'll have some questions for you shortly. Why don't Cindy? Why don't we turn it over to you? I know you've got a presentation. Hopefully you can just share your screen. The bottom of the.
Okay, there we go. Can you guys see it?
I can't see it yet. Oh, here it comes.
Can you see? Do you see the display, like the actual, like this? Do we understand supply chain?
Yeah, we see the first slide. So go ahead.
Perfect. Okay, so I'm actually going to sort of piggyback on what Tom was saying, and sort of the one thing about the women's supply chain that one of the key reasons that I really pushed to keep it going was that supply chain isn't just any one piece or component. And one of the biggest discoveries is the lack of sort of understanding what is supply chain and where does everybody fit. So the Supply Chain Canada has sort of people who are designated and trying to adapt, understand it. But within that, you have your logistics, your procurement, your manufacturing, your engineering, finance, the people. So it's the bigger scope and the warehousing, the manufacturing. And one of the biggest things is that, and Tom will agree to, most will agree to this, is that what happens is that each little group, if I'm in manufacturing, I get a little bit myopic and forget what I'm doing in terms of how does the guys from the inside or from the outside impact what I'm doing. So that's one of the things that's a problem. So when you take a look at a real simple view of what supply chain is, you've got your suppliers, which is your raw materials. I use farming because you could put everyone. You've got your mining, you've got your oil, you've got your ag business. It's that first piece. But even within that sort of farming, they also have to take into consideration that they need to look at their materials, their supplies, their manpower, feed, for example, oil, all those pieces they also need. So there's a manufacturing distribution that becomes a cycle for everybody. And one component within all of it can cause some problems. So it comes down to, are you aware of where each piece of what you're looking for is coming from and how is it being impacted? And just assuming it's an essential service in today's market might be where we make a mistake, like the food industry. We think that the food industry should all be at full capacity. But for example, companies like Cisco had to lay off because they don't go to the end user consumer, they go to the retailer in terms of the catering and the restaurants. So if the restaurants are closed, that food is not being requested. So it's just not, food is needed. Not all food is benefiting. And then are the farmers able to get their goods to the producers where you got the manufacturing? Then you have your whole logistics of your goods coming and going, and then you have your consumers who are being impacted by poor education or understanding, anxiety, uncertainty, and decisions are being poorly made, which loops back and causes a really bad sort of backlash because people don't know how to adapt. So should we make more toilet paper because we ran out of toilet paper? And what is our data analytics going to show when we come out of this, how much toilet paper we need? So when we're looking at it, we have to stop and not react to the first incident and then really take a good look at each component. For example, I'm running into some interesting challenges in the transportation side. So we assume that the drivers are great. There should be a lot of drivers. There's 230,000 licensed drivers in Alberta. But ironically, they can't just transfer from one company to the next because there's an inherent underlying challenge where the government, and it's not just Alberta, if this is national, we don't certify our drivers so that if they have their ticket and they are needed in another location, the process to integrate them into a company becomes very expensive and arduous, and people avoid it. Becomes really difficult. So government needs to address that. That's been a 20-year problem. So when you look at that issue, you might say, well, we have a lot of trucks, we have a lot of drivers, but we can't just move them across platforms. Not every truck is the same. A truck that hauls in oil and gas just cannot suddenly get into moving foods and supplies. So what we think we have a lot of, we don't. And when we start to pressure one area and we have no resources to draw from, those are planning issues that people don't necessarily take into consideration. And there's a lot of assumption. The same is with maintenance, parts and supplies for the service industry to keep our vehicles on the road. I've been hearing from the Motor Dealers Association and the local associations, and consumers are calling angry that dealerships are open, but yet we need them or we're not going to get our supply. So there's a catch-22 on that. I'm going to kind of keep it quick. So one of the things is what happens to one link in our food system breaks down. So I don't know if anybody's heard. So some of the food processing plants are shutting down in the States. We haven't really heard of that happening in Canada yet. But one link breaking down becomes a real critical issue. We have been a little complacent in how we operate that. We just assume it's always going to be there. Someone else will fill it. But how long can we maintain that? So if I'm a producer in that middle, how can I secure my position in this chain, be it whatever, you can replace any component. How can I protect where I'm in this cycle should something like this happen again? So when we're looking at, we just assume that there's a cow, there's milk, there's that, it'll get to me, but not everybody's aware of all the links that are in there. And when you get stuck in one link, you sort of get lost. So it's stopping and really drawing out, where is it coming from? How can I prepare? And what will be the cost coming back? I'm going to give you an example of what people wouldn't assume. So Spray Lake Sawmill was just shut down on March 31st or March 30th. And they're considered an essential service. They supply a lot of the sawdust, like the mulch that we use, that farmers would use, any sort of producers, bedding for animals, and they are not open to supply in Alberta right now because they actually don't have enough demand on cut wood. So if they're not creating the material, they actually can't be open to supply it. So we just assume that, if the sawmill's open, that they can continue to supply, but they can't. So they're shut down. In order to service a customer in Alberta that would need this, the cost has gone up 600% to access the same material that you would have got prior to March 30th. So when you're looking at the economy and how are you going to adapt and how can we prepare our businesses and our community to understand, they need to understand sort of the ripple effect of one action to the next. And it's, like I say, stop and take a look at, if this one piece has an impact, what is the downward impact? And can we manage it? And what is going to be the impact to us? So if you are a farmer and you are utilizing that material, they're down. Now, what pressure is that on the cost basis for the farmer, and to now get a 600% hit on their material? So one of the things that, and I've talked to some friends that work for Loblaws, and I think everybody's heard, not just Loblaws, where employees are being impacted by the pressures and being the COVID virus directly. And if you take a look at the producers, for example, and they're having to look at the fact that they're going to have to shut down because of one or two incidents of the virus. So now we have to take into consideration social engineering and having engineers come in and redesign. And then there's going to be the demand or the concern about, well, what about the people? Well, you almost have to consider that you're actually having to redesign everything to protect people, which is also the employees. How do you go back into a factory and put barriers or safety features? Do you have to look at more automation? The stores are looking more at that Amazon Go theory, where it's there's no cashier or cash, and that way you save that contact. There's less potential of any kind of contamination. Now that's a cost as well. So these are things that businesses now need to stop and really think about and prepare themselves so that they know what they're going to have to look at in the future. But that being said, that there's money. So like Tom said, Canada doesn't have the investment or the infrastructure to just jump on all of these ideas and these needs. Right now, there's so much uncertainty. The market is scared. We have an unemployment situation. It's not going to be just open the doors and bring people back, because we can't bring our employees back until we know that they are in a secure and safe environment. So then the consumer is concerned because they don't know whether or not they're going to be in a position to purchase. So it becomes this sort of whole ripple effect. And there's a lot of conversation, and there's a slide again where we're looking at, well, should we just put all our eggs in China or all our eggs in Mexico or anywhere that everybody wants to say that they should stop purchasing from. But Canada doesn't have the investment or the manpower or just the population to justify opening up a vast amount of manufacturing, and our cost of operating is just so high that unless we have a complete social shift where everyone agrees that I'm not going to buy 20 t-shirts, I'm going to buy one, and I'll pay that cost, we won't. That's something we just cannot see Canada being in a position to do. I mean, they can't even do that very well in the US because still there's that cost component that people put on what they want to purchase. And then when the markets, what are they going to look at investing, and how long will they stay invested in that area? Right now, it might be in the transportation business. It might be in certain essential areas. But when that shifts, where will it go? Airlines, we need them now, but how long can they sustain when the cost of operating and the lack of demand can only go for so long? And another area where, this is something that we should look at now and prepare for, where we can actually start to look at investment that would actually benefit Alberta, especially with a lot of the efforts to bring technology and diversify our economy. There was a lot of neglect on digital transformation. There's a lot of neglect on internet or reliability in terms of having technology. We can sit here in our Zoom meeting and know that we have a great computer system, and we can hope and then try and figure it out. But there are still a lot of communities that do not have reliable internet. There are still people that do not have computers or internet, and there are kids at home that are probably not getting the education they want. Farmers in rural communities do not have reliable connectivity for the internet so that they can operate these great programs that can give them some competitiveness. The cost for them to have that infrastructure is quite high. That's a burden that they don't know if they can recover in the cost of their product. So these are the things that the government needs to be a part of. And these are the things that we can utilize the manpower in terms of the diversification of our economy to help grow, where if we start to put these little sort of infrastructure pieces that aren't just in the roadway specifically, we'll have that visibility. We'll be able to make sure that all of our community is able to be educated, informed, and have a sense of really sort of moving into the future and understanding what's going on. Because right now we have a problem. We do not have the type of infrastructure and our technology, business-wise or individually, that is going to satisfy us long-term. And it shows up in really unique moments like this. But these are the things that when we're stepping out of it, that we can start to look at now and start to generate economies where we're thinking we might lose them. And this is my final slide, so you guys can be excited. Here's a comment that came out of from the CBC, Canada building its own PPE supply chain in China. That's what they're doing now. And it's something that we have to ask ourselves, what will really change here? So the governments and large corporations are working at facilitating PPEs, but the healthcare system has always purchased based on a consortium where they don't even actually ask the price. It's just quality and availability. That's changed. So if they're going to have this happening in their space, what will that really do for how any one of us and anything we're doing change? And so when we're looking at what are we going to do to step forward, it's a bigger picture and it's something that we have to almost go back to the beginning, really analyze it and see how we can work together to sort of establish an understanding and more of a cooperation. If we're going to have to get masks and we're just leaving it to healthcare, should we not be asking, should we not be looking for masks for all industries and have a collaboration where we have better success? I know I'm in the middle of helping the trucking industry in Alberta source masks for their drivers, and they don't. There's a problem. So who saw this, and it's going to be a long term. So as we're trying to look at the economy and moving our areas forward, what do we need to do collaboratively, go outside of what our knowledge and comfort zone is to try and have that sort of visibility and realize it's not just, any one component. It is everybody needs to open up and have that conversation. And I'm done.
Thank you very much, Cindy. Some of those graphics are great because they just really do show you how interconnected everything is, and how each of us in our own communities when you start to unravel what each business depends on, and how one thing, if it's impacted, can have several ripple effects. That's quite telling. So Cindy, I know we'll come back to you for questions. Just if you could unshare your screen.
That's a good question. Now, here's the question: how do you do that?
Back down. Maybe I can undo it for you.
Oh, here we go. Oh, there it is.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, and so as you do that, I'll introduce, like I said, Martin Ebel, our board member, got in touch with Dallas yesterday, and I'm pleased to have you on the line, Dallas, because I think you're going to be bringing a very different perspective on this whole issue. So maybe you can talk about a little bit about what Transmark Limited does and how you see the supply chain in Alberta right now.
Hey, I appreciate the opportunity to comment. It's a little bit nerve-wracking for me, but that's all good. I've learned a lot already from Tom and Cindy, and I appreciate the things that they've said. Just to give everybody a little bit of a background, Transmark is a rail facility. We started back in 2001. We were in the agricultural industry, so we were actually transloading grain from Eastern Canada, needed a place to bring in product by rail, and we were trucking it. And then BSE hit in 2003, so we kind of had to divert, and we started going into the opportunity to bring in windmills. And so the energy sector started to take over a little bit. And we started out with 5 small tracks, and today we've got 55 tracks with about 20 miles of tracks, which can hold about 1,400 rail cars. And right now we're full. Basically, there's 2 things that are causing the change. The oil prices is the biggest issue. The majority of our customers are oil and gas companies, the large aid companies such as Imperial Oil, Shell, those kind of companies. And the other was the COVID problem. And because there's not as much product used in the countries, the demand is going down, and so these companies are looking to store their cars. They just can't get them into the market. Big thing is the oil companies are now running out of storage because they've got all this production of oil, and so they're wanting to store loaded rail cars before they can sell them at a loss. So they would rather store them on cars and wait till the markets change versus selling them at the market at a low rate. And so that's not happening. Fortunately, we don't have any more room, but there are facilities that are kind of popping up everywhere that these companies are looking to store rail cars for short-term and long-term. I talked to some of the big companies here recently, and they're not predicting any kind of movement probably for Q4, maybe into 21. So there's a lot of product that's sitting, a lot of cars that are being just parked for lack of ability to move anywhere. We have the option. We've got 2 third parties on site which do railcar repairs, and so these companies are taking advantage of that opportunity to inspect the cars, do some minor repairs, cleaning, all that kind of thing that happens while the cars are parked, and it saves them some money on transferring these cars from repair facilities back and forth. So we're doing that quite a bit lately. I was talking to the leasing, the opportunity, the exploration is down 50% from what it normally is, and 60% down on on the demand for the product. So it's a huge impact that we're having in this sector. And just in supply chain, so I don't know a lot of how it all ends up in the end. But I was just kind of thinking a lot about what the future holds for this industry, and right now we're inundated fear and uncertainty and not knowing what's going. But I think we have to do a lot of forward thinking and long-term thinking and change maybe the way we do business. I mean, we've talked a lot about inland terminals, inland port, where everything is kind of consolidated into one area. We can maximize our logistics. We can online shopping is huge and it's getting bigger. And so we've kind of look at how we get product to the customer or to the end users. And technology, we've used technology, like Cindy indicated, we need to go further. We've discovered now that we can be sitting at home and be productive. And so overheads can be lower in different businesses. We don't need to go to these big, huge office buildings and pay all this kind of high overhead when we can get the work done. Maybe people don't want to be at home, so that's enough. But we've got to think of our frontline workers, how their long-term is going to work out. What we need to retrain, maybe do things a little bit differently that way. It's making us look at different things, different ways of doing things. We're needing to diversify. We've diversified just out of, we were in the agricultural, we went to the energy side, now we're into the repairs. We do transloading for butane, propane that's going to Mexico. There's all sorts of things that will happen, but we've just got to look for those opportunities and take the bad that we've got now and turn it into some positive thinking and some, we'll get over this, we'll change, we'll learn from it. But we've got to look at our health and safety, the way we treat our employees, the way we look at things in that regard, so that in the future, if something like this happens, we're prepared. We know what to look for. We know how to solve the problems before we get there. And in this way we do things, it will eliminate shutting down the whole economy just by the way we've already done our business. We've got to look at how we what we're supplying, if we're into supplying too much, how we're supply and demand. If we're I look at all this oil, and maybe the way we're looking at things is changing. We're looking at electric cars, we're looking at green, we're looking at all the different things that are happening in the world today. Maybe we don't need to rely on oil as much, and maybe they're overproducing. Maybe, I'm just kind of throwing things out. There's lots of things that we can look at. So as far as I'm concerned, like, I'm just a little guy on the supply chain, but it affects all of us in lots of different ways. Fortunately for us, we're full. We're business as usual. We're a essential service. The CP Rail is our mainline provider, and we're working well with them. But things are bottlenecking. We don't get the movements like we used to. There's just no place for things to go, and at some point it's going to hurt somebody, because these big companies are looking for places to store their cars and they're running out of room. So it's opportunity for other people to build, but it's too late to get started. By the time you get done, it will be so. I don't know. That's kind of my take on things, but I'd be happy to answer any questions anyways.
Okay, well, thank you. So just before we open it up for questions, Cindy, Tom, do you guys have anything else you want to add before we open it up? Just in case something triggered while we were talking? No?
Yeah, and one of the things that Dallas was mentioning, and this is sort of something we can look at, that some other issues or opportunities that we can look at is storage of our products. So when we're talking about sort of that inland port and that, the one thing that, especially Alberta has a great opportunity to expand on is storage. So if we're starting to have to look at the fact that we cannot run our businesses and our lives on a just-in-time availability, that would also mean that that we have to consider what is storage going to look like and how much will that cost and what is available. If you look at storage for oil, there was an article about, if you have storage, that's you control that, and that's where sort of the oil in the Middle East is having some values because they have the capacity to put that into storage. That's the whole thing to look at for them. It's no different than the farmers. Where do we store what we can't actually have produced right now, and how will that be managed, and where can we do that, and how do we manage those costs? So when you're looking at storage and having that space, Dallas is there full. That means that how do we look at giving other industries the capacity? So when we're looking at how do we store our next wave of healthcare requirements? Well, what does that look like? And do the healthcare industry or those industries have the correct people in there to help them understand true procurement and management of inventory, and that sort of whole aspect in terms of, are we evaluating our inventory in terms of the length it's been in our storage containers? How many construction companies said, oh, I found, we looked in our closet, we found, 25 boxes of N95 masks. Well, who's running their inventory? So people have to realize that, when supply chain now isn't just, oh, we'll order that and we'll find a space for it. It's like, we're going to order it. When do we need it? How long will it last? What are the odds of something this happening? So there has to be sort of a greater consideration and reliability to look at supply chain personnel. It's not just somebody who's on the phone who's going to order today. And if we're going to look at storage, you need the right supply chain personnel in place to understand, well, how do I utilize that storage so that it gives me value for my company or my boss and my community? Just having storage or having these things is of no value if you can't identify the actual cost of ownership. How long will you be able to get your recovery on your investment? And so if you're going to ask for investment moving forward as a business, can that person in your company help you identify what that looks like and what that means? And it can't be somebody just in finance, because finance doesn't understand the nuances of maybe ordering, and ordering needs to understand the engineers, and there needs to be a real clear and defined understanding of the importance and value of the supply chain industry and the personnel that are trained and in that area. And maybe this is another time, as well as the trucking industry needing a lot more actually visibility. But supply chain as a whole isn't just sort of a role you kind of take in and out when you need it. It's that one role that it can save you money and save your company and help you get through events like this.
Nancy, so if I know you've been watching kind of the questions come in, can you maybe comment on one or two questions that have come in, and if they've identified who they want to answer it? Or
Sure. We have about 4 questions in right now. The first one is, what are some of the things you are hearing about the shifts between global and local supply chains? And are there any tips for us as economic development professionals to help our industries adjust?
whoever wants to take that one on, I see you all clamoring.
I'll make one attempt, and I know that Tom can follow up on this quite a bit better. There is a kind of, if I'm understanding the question, is what are we going to do in terms of changing from a global to a sort of a more national? Sort of the whole idea that we've heard from a lot of countries about trying to suck everything back into our own space, our own country, and get out of this globalization because we've seen it sort of a little bit negative. There's a lot of thought about that, but if Canada really has to be careful, we're not in a position where we can do that. We don't have the manufacturing. We do have the raw materials. We might need to develop different relationships, be a little bit more cognizant of how and when we want to sort of move forward on where we purchase. But I don't think that we can just walk away from globalization. I think we have to make our partners a lot more responsible. There has to be, like I say, more visibility and accountability. But some countries are not in a position where we can just suddenly shut down and say we're going to nationalize and it's all going to be home-based. We don't have the money to invest in it. It takes time to build a manufacturing facility and to design an entire infrastructure for distribution. That's not something that to say we shouldn't do, but that's not something we're going to see in the next, year. That's 5 to 10 year plans. And do we still have can somebody give you that return on investment? I think we have to be very careful in our emotional saying, well, let's forget about China. Maybe it might not be China. Maybe it'll be some other country. Maybe we'll have a different relationship with the US and Mexico. Maybe it'll get into South America. But the fact is, Canada itself is not in a position to say that we can't go global, especially since the majority of what we have is raw materials, and we're not producing anything with those raw materials as a whole. So we need to have relationships and still maintain global, but we need to have that visibility and that credibility in our relationships and our interactions. That's my take on it. Tom, I'm going to throw it over to you now.
So I think what we can do as economic developers, I think that's an interesting question, and I don't have a perfect answer for that. But the reality of where we're at today is we do produce, we've got steel manufacturing, we've got aerospace manufacturing, we've got different manufacturers on a smaller scale. We arguably have or used to have enough capacity to service our own economy. But through 2008, 2011, the different downturns that we've had, we've seen, a softening of our local economy. We've seen a shrinking of our manufacturing base. And we've seen the large companies, especially in energy, start to look to develop more globalized supply chains. And in fact, governments have supported companies to expand and to look international. And I still, I think that's always been a good idea. I think, there's a lot of support local. The U.S. is, obviously the biggest proponents through government of spending all of their money as much as they can nationally, as even with their free trade agreements. And I think that the challenge that we'll have is getting people to finally truly understand what their supply chains actually are. I think we've gone over that a few times now, and the reality is we need to become more sophisticated. Our businesses need to become more sophisticated at the managerial level. And I've been saying that for 5 years when I was in economic development, and we've developed programs around that. And I think we've done a lot of the right things. This point in time, what do we do moving forward? I think we really have to get better at identifying what our resources are and how we support them through this time. The administrative burden of starting up again when this all goes through is going to be enormous. And companies, a lot of companies aren't just going to make it. That's just the reality of where we are. The ones that do are going, if they're unable to maintain some sort of operational efficiency in this time, are going to take a lot of time and need resources to get started again when they come out the other end. So how do we do that? I don't know. I mean, we want to be part of that conversation. And I think what we need to do is research what's happened with H1N1, what happened with SARS, how did those economies get restarted? What are the lessons learned from from those smaller issues, not to say they weren't issues, but those were kept geographically in smaller areas for the most part. So what can we learn from what they did to restart? And I think that's the research and the work that we all have to do. In the interim, there are organizations like ours that can grow and develop talent. Yes, there's the university system as well, but whether it's getting people to go after designations, develop management sophistication on their own so that when they come back to work, they're prepared, they're different, they're ready, they're better than when we went into this period coming out. I think those are the things we really need to look at. And I think we, as when I say the royal we here, when it comes to the not-for-profits, the government agencies, economic developers as a whole, I think we need to look at what our best practices are and how we work together better as well. Because I think, things like this have been fantastic, but how do we coordinate better for if this happens again? And I'll leave you with one last thought when it comes to developing international supply chains. It's never a good idea to be too compact, but it's also a very good idea to truly understand how to develop an international supply chain, because it's not just about COVID. If climate change does become a bigger and bigger issue, whether it's a volcano that goes off that cuts into air traffic, which we had, I think, 6 years ago in Iceland, there's all of these things that have happened that have shut down supply chains in the past. How well have we mitigated those risks? How well do even supply chain professionals today understand how to grow international supply chains so they're not just hemmed into China, for instance? I mean, if you have a fully European supply chain, European Canadian supply chain, and there's a volcano that happens that shuts down your air, well, what about the southern hemisphere? Can you move product that way? So I think we have some work to do in that space as well. But in terms of training our staff, but we're here as a resource. I'm reaching out to all my government contacts and anyone that's here. I don't have all the answers, but we're willing to work together to try to figure some of those things out.
I have another question here. This is for Dallas and Cindy. I'm curious about using rail cars containers for storage. I used to work in the transportation industry, and from the transportation company perspective, we tried not to let our clients use our trailers as storage, as those pieces of equipment weren't generating the same kind of revenue as they would when they were in active transport. What are your thoughts on that?
So actually, it's a terrible thought actually crossed my mind, and I don't want to be morbid, but right now, if you look at the U.S. and you see what they're doing with reefer trailers, that means that there's not enough demand for those trailers, and they're being used for a component that you would never, in the back of your mind, consider that they would have had to. But there are a lot of times when you take a look at what if I have a trailer that could make $100 an hour, but it's not doing anything. What is the worst alternative if I get something versus nothing at all? It's really having the capacity to understand what your true cost of that trailer is, what the cost of not having it move might be, what's the turn, how long are you going to be considering the storage? Is there sort of a kind of component in terms of a shared opportunity? If you're saying you're going to share with somebody, I know that when transportation drops off goods to a warehouse, that doesn't mean that trailer is unloaded immediately. It could sit there for almost a week before it's unloaded. How are those times being managed? If you can understand the actual cost of your container, the length of time, and what your cost of it not being utilized is, then there's some value in terms of measuring it. When we're at full capacity, that's when everyone talks about, like even grain, like, oh, it's time to upgrade our trailers and our tankers and everything. But it's still going to come down to what is the long-term, what is my actual cost on that, so that I can benefit from not having it do anything. And then take a look at if we, like Tom says, they're a resource to help integrate. If there's a greater communication amongst carriers and industries, we can be aware of shortage and pull from each other on a need-to basis when instances like this happen. If, for example, the truck drivers were certified in a manner that they were transferable like a technician, an automotive or heavy-duty technician, and we need drivers fast, we can't do that. They're stuck. So there are things like, so if you take a look at how we can cooperate and integrate and share, then I think there's a great opportunity.
I was just going to mention as well, like in the agricultural side, they've been using the rail cars as storage for a long time. We bring in soybean or soy meal, corn, those kind of things. They'll utilize the rail car as a storage facility. So they bring it to site and it can sit here for a month or two, and as the trucks come in to unload, with the daily rate for the cars to sit, but it's much less trying to bid bins and all that kind of thing. So they've got these cars leased already, so it's just a matter of utilizing their inventory and their equipment, and so they'll pay to store the cars for a set period of time, utilize the rail car as their storage bin. There are also, as recently, we've got some elevators, agricultural elevators in the area that have been fairly empty, and so they're bringing in product like barley and corn and different products from the U.S., filling those elevators with the product and then shipping them out as needed. So the cars are kind of moving in, but they're utilizing the facilities that are normally full but haven't been full lately. So they're utilizing those elevators during the winter times when there's no harvest. So that's kind of happening and has happened for quite some time.
Okay, Leanne, I think we have time just for one final question. How about this one? Do you see opportunities for local, regional, independent SMEs to be more competitive with larger retailers like Amazon and Walmart in the acquiring product in smaller quantities to sell into their market?
Can you repeat the question one more time? Sorry.
Do you see opportunities for local and regional independent SMEs to be more competitive with larger retailers like Amazon and Walmart in the acquiring of product in smaller quantities to sell into their market?
I think my answer to that would be, in the short term, there's a possibility. I think if you look at our, if you're just going to go to buying statistics, especially in Canada, I think there is more and more a drive to buy local. The challenge will be whether or not the local sales can compete price-wise, and I don't think in the interim they necessarily have to, but in the longer term they'll need to. So I think that's a really difficult question to answer, in part because it's an it depends kind of answer to it. But I do think in this time there are opportunities, and in fact, I think for us, even as an organization, as Supply Chain Canada, everyone in the world's talking about supply chain. If we can't find a way to capitalize on that and seek the opportunity in it, we probably are never going to grow or never be more recognized than we are right now. So for us specifically, there is an opportunity. Whether we can capitalize on it or not is a whole other issue. I think it comes back to what I said about earlier. It comes back to management sophistication and your ability to manage your way through these times. And I think traditionally, because as Cindy related to, we have been price takers, we have been commodity sellers, we don't necessarily have the management sophistication. It sounds mean, but it isn't. I don't mean it to be that way. It's that we haven't had to compete globally. We have been price takers for the most part. We are commodity sellers, and we're really damn good at it. The reality is we have to get better at other things. And so this would be an example of us having to get better at other things. And if we can figure out how to do it, then yes, there's huge opportunities right now, but we got to be better marketers and we got to be better managers. And we're not very good marketers. We put everything in a brown paper bag and try to sell it internationally.
Yeah.
It doesn't work that way. So anyways, I think there is opportunity, but it's going to be up to us to try to figure it out. I think that's where economic development plays the biggest role, because you can help companies get management sophistication and help them to develop those types of tactics that they need to try to take advantage of it.
there was a cartoon, I was actually gonna put it on my slide, but I thought I was probably going over as it was. But there was a picture of somebody sitting there in their house and the packages showed up on their doorstep and they says, oh, we can manage this pandemic and this self-isolation. And then beside is a picture of a small business with nothing happening, with a sign outside saying free pickup or delivery, curbside. It's not so easy just to say that, oh, we can compete. It's a perception, and Tom was right. Like, we are great at what we've done. It is not serving us really well now. For Amazon is made a mandate where they're not going to put in their warehouses non-essential goods. So the people that were utilizing Amazon in their own business to try and access that market, their goods are not in the warehouse. It's now direct to them. How are they shipping? It comes down to sort of, what are we selling locally? How can we differentiate ourselves? And it is in the marketing and how we go to market. People that are going out of business, and this is why it comes down to, like, who do you have selling and managing your goods? If you have somebody say, I want to go and compete against Amazon, and I'm simply going to just open up an online store and hope that it works, is why businesses go under. They don't understand the entire cost of the beginning to the end consumer and all the costs associated. To say you're going to compete against Amazon it has no value. You're running a business. What does that business offer? Who are my consumers? Do I have enough consumers that would benefit? And how can I get that to market? There are a lot of very niche and unique businesses and skill sets that Canada has that we can develop and grow and help develop. But we have to get past that. Are we going to compete against the Amazons? No. And then we have to learn to teach our communities. And this is something that I don't know any of us on this phone or can do, is that Amazon is successful because of us, not because of Amazon. They've done it well, but they did well because we wanted that service. So if we want to protect and support the businesses locally, then we have to ask ourselves, when we're starting a business or we're going to support a business, what is it that we want? How do we message that in terms of value, so that we are competing for what we have versus what Amazon is doing, and create what is necessary? Because I don't think we can say we're going to compete against Amazon, because that is not, Amazon is a whole other beast. And if Amazon's doing well, it's because we've allowed it, because we buy from them. But we have so many very skilled and great opportunities within our country to benefit in terms of the knowledge, technology. But we have to look at diversification, but we can't isolate it. We can't just market it as one piece. It is a complete package. And if we start to look at that and share marketing and knowledge and cooperation in our supply chain of our business, if I'm going to sell to a local business, am I going to make sure that I advertise for that local business so that they succeed, so that they keep buying what I'm selling? So it has to be sort of a mutual thing. But it's not just going against Amazon. It's how do we create what is important for our consumers and who's going to buy what we have. And we need to work with businesses to help them understand what does that look like. And selling everything to everyone isn't always the best either. That's my 2 cents.
We have 1 minute. So I'm going to just thank Tom, Dallas, and Cindy for your feedback. I think for those of you who work with businesses and your communities, hopefully you've got some information you can take away to whether it's helping local businesses think through their supply chain and mitigate their supply chain and look for other opportunities. I think there's some stuff that can be done now. And we will have this webinar video taped for download if you want to refer to it later. We'll also have my slides, which I neglected to put up, but they will be there for download, so you can get everybody's websites, so you can go to their websites for more information. But thank you so much, because I think this is a hot topic, and you look at it and go, what the heck can I do at the local level to help my businesses thrive through this time? Hopefully everyone got some good feedback. So we will be back next Wednesday at noon. You can register online for our next webinar. But thanks again, Tom, Dallas, and Cindy, and have a great week, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.